Best of the best, Bret the Hitman Hart. You guys know by now the Hitman's one of my favourite wrestlers of all time, and I want to talk specifically about some of my favourite Bret Hart matches. A lot of you guys wanted a more personal take in these videos rather than looking at cage match rankings and things of that nature. I always felt the cage match videos were good because it took away any bias I may have completely out of the equation. But for these best of the best videos I want to put together, I'm absolutely going to use my personal bias to present matches that I feel are worth checking out. There's going to be matches included that you feel shouldn't be here, and you're also going to think I've forgotten about some matches. So use the comment section to share your thoughts, and we can build a video page filled with the best matches for a specific wrestler, like a reference page for folks not sure where to begin when looking for classic matches from legends of the past. So here's a bunch of Bret Hart matches I think show the Hitman in the absolute best light. These are not in any particular order because I'd spend weeks trying to rank them, so do keep that in mind while watching the video. So, you've never watched the Bret Hart match and you want to see what all the fuss is about. The first match I direct you to is Bret Hart vs the 1-2-3 Kid from WWF Raw, July 11th, 1994. The Hitman was known as a storyteller in the ring, and if you want to understand what that means, I'd say this is a good place to start. The 1-2-3 Kid was the underdog going into this one. Fans knew he was incredibly athletic and the Kid had a lot of heart, but the WWF champion Bret Hart was on another level. The excellence of execution was an extremely confident technical wrestler, one of the very best WWF had at the time. Through the art of in-ring storytelling, the 1-2-3 Kid surprised the Hitman in this matchup. Bret was taken back by how good the Kid really was, and you quickly understand that Bret underestimated his opponent on this night. In reality, Bret wanted to give Shawn a match that would put him on the map and make him a star, even in defeat, and that's exactly what happened when these two went to war on what felt like another random episode of WWF Raw. The 1-2-3 Kid gave it everything he had, and at times it felt like Waltman could pull off the upset of the century. The match builds and builds with Kid pulling out more and more surprises that completely destroy Bret's game plan heading into the match. Bret may have won on this evening, but the 1-2-3 Kid earned Bret's respect, and I'm sure he gained a ton of new fans following this classic on Monday Night Raw. Not just a great Bret Hart match, it's one of the greatest matches in Raw history. Bret Hart vs Big Daddy Cool Diesel, Survivor Series 1995. This is a unique Bret Hart match where the Hitman's usual technical abilities don't serve him all that well, and Bret has to dig deep to claim a surprise victory. This is a no-holds-barred match. We've seen Hart beat big guys before, but when the rulebook's thrown out the window, Bret finds himself in a lot of trouble as Big Daddy Cool Diesel destroys the Hitman throughout most of the match. It's a slower match than others we'll look at in this video, but the pace makes sense within the context of the bout. Big Daddy Cool Diesel was going to turn heel after his babyface run in 1995 was met with a little criticism, so seeing Diesel take his time decimating Bret helped to slowly turn fans against Big Daddy Cool as they wanted Bret to stand up and fight back. There's moments where Bret gets just as vicious as Diesel. It doesn't take long for Bret to realise he's not in a wrestling match here, he's in a fight. But all hope seems lost when Bret takes a table bump that at the time didn't happen at WWF shows. In the end, Bret catches Diesel out with a small package. He's beaten up badly, but he still gets a pinfall win. And to solidify his new status as a heel, or a tweener if you like, Diesel attacks Bret after the final bell. A good fight right here, and I wanted to include this one to show how Bret could get a good match out of anybody. Diesel had some pretty bad matches in 1995. This one with Bret is not one of them. Stone Cold Steve Austin vs Bret Hart, WrestleMania 13. I hope everyone watching this video has already experienced this match, and if you haven't, man, you're in for a real treat. I'm always pretty adamant that you get way more out of pay-per-view matches if you watch the TV shows leading up to the event. Sometimes a match doesn't correctly convey the weeks or months of storyline leading up to the encounter, especially if there's a lot of small intricacies or little details thrown into the mix. It's something I try to incorporate when covering pay-per-views for Reliving the War, kinda giving viewers the ability and choice to check out TV shows in the run-up to big matches at pay-per-views. Thanks to how WWE like to look back at their own history through the documentaries they produce, many fans would believe Steve Austin showed up at WrestleMania 13 and fans decided to cheer for Stone Cold and boo Bret Hart. And this is so wrong on so many different levels. In reality, Bret Hart's heel turn had been in the making since December 1996, while Stone Cold had been getting good crowd reactions as early as January 1997. Austin was raising hell on Raw, and he was such a breath of fresh air that people were naturally gravitating towards him. Bret, meanwhile, was seen as a crybaby who liked to complain a lot, even though he had legitimate reasons to be upset in regards to his treatment within the WWF. He'd been screwed out of the WWF title on more than one occasion, and one of the men who directly cost Bret Hart the WWF title was Stone Cold Steve Austin. At WrestleMania 13, something had to give. Austin was on the brink of becoming a big babyface superstar, while Bret was slowly falling out of favour with wrestling fans due to his perceived attitude. So having these two collide at WrestleMania in a match where one man would have to give up was actually a great idea, even though the match itself was thrown together at the last minute. Bret vs Austin at Mania 13 is an all-out war. Both men show absolutely no mercy. For die-hard Bret Hart fans, it's an emotional roller coaster because he's fighting for what he believes in. And for die-hard Stone Cold fans, it's a match that could push Austin towards the WWF Championship if he can overcome his arch nemesis on the grandest stage of them all. In the end, Stone Cold passes out while locked in the sharpshooter. He doesn't give up, and even though Bret won, he still attacks Steve after the match. When Bret walks away from a fight with special referee Ken Shamrock, the whole arena boos Bret loudly, and fans cheer for Stone Cold when he walks back up the ramp without any help. I've tried to cover this match before, and I thought I'd done a terrible job in explaining what makes it so good. It's a match that you have to watch for yourself. Just make sure to take the time to understand where the characters were coming from before they walked into Mania 13, and you'll get a lot more out of this amazing matchup. I know people won't like this inclusion for obvious reasons, so I totally understand if you don't agree with me. But Bret Hart vs Chris Benoit, airing on the 4th of October 1999 on Nitro, is Bret's greatest WCW match in my opinion, and it's an extremely emotional match for the Hitman. This one takes place in the Kemper Arena in Kansas City, the same arena where Bret's brother Owen had his tragic accident. And WCW let Bret choose his opponent on this evening for an Owen Hart memorial match. Bret said there was only one person in the audience that night as he and Benoit had a match that went well over the 25-minute mark. A very rare occurrence on WCW Nitro, seeing as the company were seemingly hell-bent on putting on short matches and a million promos every Monday night on TNT. This one's been described as a classic dungeon match. It's filled with submission holds, submission counters, technical wrestling, and hard-hitting strikes. Bret and Benoit don't go easy on each other here as both men wanted to put on a memorable match for Owen. The circumstances surrounding the match are truly heartbreaking. Everyone wishes Owen was still with us and the match didn't need to take place. But Bret paid tribute to his brother here by doing what he does best, and it turned out to be one of the Hitman's greatest matches of all time. Judging by Bret's book and interviews Bret's given over the years, it's clear that Mr. Perfect was a man that Bret deeply respected. These two collided at SummerSlam 1991 with Perfect's Intercontinental Championship up for grabs, and many would say this match held in Madison Square Garden is the greatest IC title match of all time. What's remarkable about this one is the fact that Curt Hennig wrestled the match with a crippling back injury, and it's still an all-timer. God knows how good it could have been if Perfect wasn't injured, but it's hard to imagine this encounter being any better than what it was. This one marks the beginning of Bret's rise to greatness. It's his first singles championship win in the WWF, and the match itself proved that the smaller guys of the World Wrestling Federation were just as good as the big boys that main evented every show and every pay-per-view. Mr. Perfect and Bret Hart absolutely stole the show on a night headlined by Hulk Hogan and the Ultimate Warrior in a tag team match. You'd like to think the higher-ups paid close attention to this match and they realised that the things a pro wrestler can do in the ring is sometimes more important than a wrestler's size or how a wrestler looks. You have to give a lot of credit to Mr. Perfect here though. Even Bret himself said that Curt helped make the Hitman on this night. Hennig bounced all around the ring for Bret and his timing was spot on when taking his famous signature bumps. And Bret walked out of Madison Square Garden a much more valuable asset to the WWF in comparison to when he walked in. For a match like this to happen in the WWF in 1991 is almost revolutionary. Smaller guys had put on excellent matches before this one, but the spots and details in Perfect vs Hart are really hard to beat. Nothing but pure in-ring entertainment from bell to bell. Bret Hart vs little brother Owen Hart at WrestleMania 10, a match that many consider the greatest WrestleMania opening match in history. Bret had his hands full on the 20th of March 1994. He was going to wrestle Yokozuna for the WWF title in the main event, but seeing as Lex Luger was also getting a shot at Yokozuna, it was only fair too that Bret had to wrestle an additional match at the biggest show of the year. Another dungeon match filled with submission counters and technical skill that only the Calgary boys could show off during this time period. Owen and Bret put on a fun match at Mania 10 that had a great story going into it. Owen felt like he was being overlooked. Everyone loved Bret while Owen was being cast aside. The King of Hearts felt his brother was selfish and self-absorbed, and Owen also felt that he could beat his big brother if given the chance. There was no better place for Owen to defeat Bret than at WrestleMania 10. Not only would Owen get to prove himself on the biggest stage the WWF had to offer, but Owen could also seriously hurt his brother's chances of becoming WWF champion if he could do enough damage in the WrestleMania opening match. In a pretty surprising turn of events, Owen did indeed beat Bret at Mania 10, but Bret would still go on to defeat Yokozuna in the WrestleMania main event. Still, the King of Hearts got a clean victory over his brother. Owen out-wrestled the excellence of execution. The match itself is brilliant, and the action in the ring is very well complemented with this brother versus brother rivalry going on in the background. And once you get done with this one, make sure to check out their SummerSlam 1994 cage match as well. Bret Hart vs Macho Man Randy Savage, Saturday night's main event airing on the 28th of November 1987. Bret was part of the original Hart Foundation when this one took place. You've got a young heel Bret Hart here getting one of his earliest singles opportunities on a big TV show, and he's going up against the legendary Macho Man Randy Savage. Now, there is a bit of nonsense going on during this match with Jim Neidhart and Miss Elizabeth, but take that out of the equation and you get to see an early example of Bret's match tactics that would carry his singles career in the years that followed. It's a well-known fact that Macho Man Randy Savage liked to meticulously plan his matches before heading into the ring. In an era when everything was called on the fly, the Macho Man was a rare breed who liked to have every single spot planned out before the bell rang. Today, this is nothing new by the way, but back then, Savage was one of the few guys who did this move for move. With this knowledge in mind, you can see that Macho wanted to make this match all about Bret, even though the Hitman was merely a tag team wrestler and a guy who cost Savage his Intercontinental Championship. Bret gets a chance to work over specific body parts, something he would become well known for as the years went on, and Savage did a wonderful job of selling his injured leg throughout the second half of this match. Even though Macho Man was the bigger star here, Bret looked like Randy's equal. It even seemed like Bret was going to beat Macho at one point, but the Macho Man comes out on top while Bret still leaves Saturday night's main event looking incredibly good, the way it's supposed to be. This is one to check out if you want to see a younger Bret Hart going up against one of the big boys of the WWF. It shows the smaller guys can hang in there with the all-time greats if given the opportunity. And as an added bonus, the crowd's absolutely electric for this whole episode of Saturday night's main event, so give it a watch when you get a chance. Bret Hart vs The Undertaker, WWF One Night Only. This one took place on September 20th, 1997, and I think it's the best match Bret ever had with The Undertaker. In saying that, I don't think the finish of the match is as good as their SummerSlam 1997 encounter. The finish to that match is untouchable in my book, but for bell-to-bell action, the match that took place in Birmingham, in my opinion, is way better than SummerSlam. I think Bret was relying on the UK fans cheering him at One Night Only. This one took place in the middle of the excellent Hart Foundation versus USA feud after all, but the WWF slipped up here by putting Bret against The Undertaker in the United Kingdom. Fans who attended One Night Only loved the Phenom and Bret ended up getting a mixed reaction, and I do feel if Bret went up against anyone else, the crowd would have been way different. Owen Hart, for example, got a thunderous ovation at the same show when he faced Vader. One of the big Bret Hart matches that I never liked was Bret vs Undertaker at Royal Rumble 1996. I still think that's a tough match to get through due to how it drags on a bit. SummerSlam 97 was a massive improvement, and I think One Night Only was the best match these two legends ever had together. So it feels like these two got better and more comfortable with each other in the ring with each passing match. If I had to recommend one Undertaker vs Bret Hart match, it would definitely be this one at One Night Only. Another Bret Hart vs Steve Austin match. Many people prefer their Survivor Series 96 encounter more so than their WrestleMania 13 match, and it's easy to see why. It's not really a hot take to like this one more than the submission match because both matches are good for their own reasons. This is Bret's comeback match following his loss to Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania 12. The Hitman handpicked Steve Austin as his opponent at Survivor Series because he felt Austin was the best pro wrestler the WWF had to offer at the time. So not only was the pressure on Bret to have a successful comeback match in Madison Square Garden, but the pressure was also on Steve Austin to step up to the plate and have a memorable match against the WWF legend. This was Steve Austin's biggest match up until this point. He did win the King of the Ring, of course, and he had what I feel is a terribly underrated match against Triple H at In Your House Buried Alive the month before Survivor Series, but going up against Bret would no doubt be Austin's most prolific match to date, and it was a real opportunity for Stone Cold to show what he could do on a big stage against the WWF megastar. It would turn out that Bret Hart and Steve Austin would have undeniable natural chemistry in the ring. This is a 30-minute match with incredible pacing throughout, which is a testament to both guys' offensive abilities. Austin, at the time, was a great technician in the ring, yet he knew when to turn it up and get a little more dirty when needed. And this complemented Bret's ring style a lot, seeing as Bret also had the same qualities, albeit in a more babyface good guy manner. So you get great pacing, great technical wrestling, and great brawling when the time's just right. You also get Austin almost beating the Hitman, and I love Austin's reaction after the bout. He has this look on his face as if to say, I had him, I really should have won. But thankfully, Survivor Series 96 was only the beginning of this long, storied rivalry. The finish to Survivor Series 96 was copied from WrestleMania 8, Bret Hart vs Roddy Piper, only the match itself was very, very different. This is another one I rank very highly when talking about Bret's abilities as a storyteller, and it's probably the match I'd show people who weren't entirely sure how a wrestler could tell a story by what they do inside a wrestling ring. In saying that though, Roddy Piper deserves just as much credit as Bret for this one. The Hart vs Piper match at Mania 8 is so simple yet so effective. It's a case of anything you can do, I can do better. The two go back and forth in the early going of the match by pulling off the same moves as one another. It seems like it's going to be a fair match where the better man's going to win, but Bret out wrestles Piper one too many times, and this brings out the old Roddy Piper, the dirty brawler who'll do anything it takes to win a match. Piper begins to slowly throw away his personal relationship with Bret and the Hart family in order to retain his IC championship. He bloodies Bret up pretty badly, and Piper continues to resort to heel tactics to gain the upper hand. Piper has the opportunity to finish Bret off with the help of the ring bell, but Roddy can't do it. In the end, Piper regaining his conscience leads to him losing the Intercontinental Championship, but he's also happy for Bret after the match, and the two leave the ring together still friends. This one shows the effectiveness of in-ring storytelling. You'll be hard-pressed to find a WrestleMania match where so little happens, yet what does happen means so much. And it's another example of a legendary superstar helping to make Bret Hart the legend he'd become in the years that followed. This is one of my favourite Intercontinental Championship matches that ever took place at WrestleMania. The Canadian Stampede 10-man tag that happened on 6th of July 1997 isn't a match that showcases Bret's abilities as a pro wrestler, rather it showcases just how much he and the Hart family were loved in Calgary. For Bret Hart fans who stuck with Bret in 1997, this match is vindication. It proved that everything Bret said was right. He and the Hart Foundation were still loved everywhere but the United States of America, and you gotta give it to the WWF for actually putting on a pay-per-view in Calgary in the middle of this whole Hart Foundation vs USA storyline. Bret, Owen, Jim Neidhart, Davey Boy Smith and Brian Pillman took on Steve Austin, Ken Shamrock, Goldust and the Road Warriors in a main event 10-man tag match, and it's one of those bouts that gives you goosebumps on more than one occasion. The Hart Foundation's entrance is incredible. The stare down at the beginning of the match is really well done. The crowd popping for each and every Hart Foundation member when they get tagged in. It's just a wild scene inside the Calgary Saddle Dome, and it really is a lightning in a bottle kind of match. The storyline, the venue, the competitors, the stars aligned here, and it made for an incredibly fun and entertaining match. Again, it's not a match I'd recommend if you wanted to see Bret Hart wrestling his finest match, but it ranks highly due to the insane fan support Bret and the Hart Foundation had in Calgary. Matches with this kind of atmosphere are very hard to come by, so do check it out if for some reason you haven't seen it already. Actually, just watch the whole pay-per-view. It's one of the best in your house events the WWF ever produced. There's only one other person who Bret called the best there is, the best there was, and the best there ever will be, and that was Tom Billington, the Dynamite Kid. Bret said he looked up to Dynamite, he wanted to be just like Dynamite inside the ring, and these two had tangled up multiple times inside the ropes, but the one I'd recommend you check out is their match from the Capitol Center airing on 8th of October 1985. It's a WWF match. This one's currently uploaded to YouTube, so it's easy to check out. It's a little slow to start and it ends quite abruptly, but everything in between so smooth that it still holds up incredibly well today. Make sure you listen to the match commentary too. These two work so hard that even Gorilla Monsoon's a little taken back by the high work rate. What you get to see here is Bret wrestling someone who he looked up to and who he respected. You can see the influence Dynamite had on Bret even when these two work against each other, yet Dynamite had a much more aggressive and snappy moveset, whereas Bret's offense is a little more calculated and a little more thought out. The stories we hear about Dynamite don't paint a very pretty picture. There's stories of him having altercations with other wrestlers and his personal life seemed to be on a constant downward spiral, but he was a big influence on other wrestlers by taking what he learned overseas and bringing a new style of wrestling to North America. Had Bret Hart not been inspired by Dynamite Kid, he might have had a very different career path. It's always good when you see wrestlers take on guys they looked up to. Not many people talk about this Bret vs Dynamite match, or any Bret vs Dynamite match, strangely enough, so this is a good place to start before looking at their other singles and tag encounters. Loads of matches have been left off this video, but I have to stop at some point or I'll be talking on for hours. Bret vs Shawn at Survivor Series 92, Bret vs Hakushi, Bret and Owen vs Rick and Scott Steiner, Bret vs Bulldog at SummerSlam 92 and in Your House 5, Bret Hart vs Terry Funk and Amarillo, every Bret match from the 1993 King of the Ring. There's so many good Bret Hart matches to choose from and it goes to show how good he really was. Let me know your favourite Bret Hart matches so viewers can check the comments to get more recommendations. This Best of the Best series is going to continue on with different wrestlers getting featured in different videos, so hopefully we can build up the ultimate match guide for some of the biggest names in pro wrestling and create a great reference tool for fans who want to check out great matches from the glory days. Thanks for watching everyone, and please take care.